Jairam? Jeff?
Yes, please. We can begin. We have 72 participants on Zoom and another 10 on YouTube. So about 82 in all.
Sure. Let's start.
Thank you.
Good evening to all of you on this side of the continent, that is the Indian continent, and good morning to you, Jeff. Thank you very much for being with us today. Let me welcome all the participants and Jeff for being with us, and Jeff specifically for speaking to all of us and enlightening us on the topic of data analytics, data-driven audits. Now, Sama Audit Systems and Softwares Private Limited was thinking that how do we disseminate knowledge, experiences on analytics across the country, and we have been doing that for the last 18-20 years. There is the Google group where we send out case studies. There are emails, white papers that are sent out, video clips that are sent out. And then we thought, we have got so much of critical mass in the country and even abroad in terms of analytics, not only idea analytics, but also in general use of analytics and by professionals across. There's so much of depth, so much of critical mass in the country itself that we can speak on it continuously. So with that in mind, what we said is what is doable by Sama Audit Systems and Softwares Private Limited. So we said we coined the word Analytics Wednesday, and we said that every Wednesday in the evening we'll make an effort to have one speaker come in and enlighten all of us, talk to all of us, and then we could put some questions to the speaker and get some answers, if we have some queries. So with that in mind, we said, let's start this journey and let's see how we can do this every Wednesday. I don't have any doubts with regard to, doing it every Wednesday, because we already booked up to June end. Like there are so many speakers who are available who want to share and whom we can bring to the platform, that's so much of knowledge that can be shared with all of us. So with that in mind, the first episode, Analytics Wednesday, we said, let us go to Jeffery Sorensen, who was here in India in Feb 2020, just before the pandemic began. He interacted with a lot of chief internal auditors, and he would be the right person to start this off, be the first speaker in this series of Analytics Wednesday. So with that in mind, Sama Audit has brought today, requested Jeffery Sorensen to speak on data-driven audit. So with that, I think I will not say anything more. I'll hand it over to him so that he can interact with us, he can guide us, and then we can put questions to him. Whatever questions are put to him, he will answer at the end of the session. Jairam will coordinate that. And even if you have questions thereafter, later, you can send it to us and we will forward it to him so that he may, time permitting, send answers to them or interact with any of you or all of you. With that, Jeff, over to you.
Thank you very much, Deepji. Yes, I remember. Wow, what is? Look at the changes happened since the last time I was in India. No, I always enjoy speaking and working with Sama Audit. So I'm really happy to be here to share sort of my perspective on data analytics. So what I'm going to do, let me just share my screen, and I'm going to skip in and out because I have what do you call it? Some videos that I'm going to show along the way. And when I do that, I have to sort of stop sharing and then check a box and then start sharing again. So you're going to see me sort of pop in and out a little bit, but it should be pretty seamless. So, well, thank you very much to Deepji and the whole crew at Sama Audit for having me here. This is called The Importance of Data Analytics. And again, this is the kickoff session for Analytics Wednesdays. I'm happy to be here. We also, in collaboration and supported by the Government of Canada Trade Commissioner Service. Thank you very much for doing that. So I think we'll just kick it off here. Okay, that's me. If you look at the webcam, a few things have changed over the time. It's COVID. I've dropped the tie. I do have the official logo of IDEA here. More beard, hair is longer. But things have changed in this time we live in, And I'm an industry lead at Caseware Idea. I'm going to talk a bit about what sort of will bring that experience to the table here. Okay, so the agenda today, first of all, I have to mention a bit about the world we live in has changed, and what the impact is on the business world, particularly. That's really the important part here. We all know about the humanitarian crisis. We don't have to talk about that today, but we do have to look at what happens to our businesses and what happens to our trade, because that's where internal audit's going to see, you're part of that organization, and how is it impacting us across the world. But really the intention here is to talk about data analytics in terms of each of the audit phases, because that's where we do it. That's where we are actually going to execute on our data analytics. So this whole session is really about saying, from the planning perspective, from the execution perspective, and reporting phase, for each of those phases, how is data analytics really going to happen? What do we do? So let's get started. All right. Well, it goes without saying that COVID-19 has really changed the entire world. And from a business perspective, we were always very proud of our global supply chains, that you could make something anywhere in the world and assemble it somewhere else in the world, and the whole world economy would benefit. And that's been true for a very long time. But, we're in a situation now where we actually need domestic supply. And global supply is almost a luxury sometimes, because we're seeing domestic emergencies, and sometimes we all assumed that we could just, order something from another country, and that's no longer available. Canada has had that very situation where we used to have vaccine manufacturing, and then they stopped doing it because they thought it's cheaper and better to get it from the United States. Well, when the crisis hit, they were focusing on themselves, so we couldn't get supply from them. So that just goes to show, and I think a lot of that is changing in organizations around, and companies and countries around the world, is they're starting to take a hard look at supply chains. And I would say, as auditors, you should be in that conversation. Is how do we get our products? Where are we supplied from? How much of it should we make ourselves? Can we rely on other countries for every single product? Some, of course, you can rely on, but there's some products that are more critical than others. So this is shaking up this entire concept of supply chains. Remote working. I think we all know that it is here to stay. I mean, remote working, and it's interesting because I was actually doing this for maybe 10 years. Oh, maybe close to it. Where I was in the office, in different offices. I would live in Toronto and go into the Ottawa office every 2 weeks or every month, and I would have occasional meetings. And this is what everyone's doing now. Will audit return to the office is a big question because of how the world has changed. And there have been surveys. The Institute of Internal Auditors in the United States have a report where they talked a bit about what they're seeing. So that's kind of interesting. If you want to look at the state of internal audit, there's one report where they talk about it. And I'm sure in India, it's going to be very similar, right? The world is become a smaller place. And what you see in one part of the world, you will see in other parts as well. So this is a big question, right, about remote working. So if that's the case, that internal audit and auditors are going to be working a lot more remotely than they ever did before, it has challenges, but it also comes with some opportunities. You're going to look at how can we take advantage of this? How can we try to make audit more relevant in this new world? And data analytics will have to be front and center, because we can't rely on the personal visits and drop-ins to management to have a big conversation. We're going to have to look more at data analytics. And there are many drivers for data analytics. Volume is absolutely critical. There's just so much data now. Have you noticed how data has grown over the past decade? Is just that what used to happen in a nice little spreadsheet is bursting at the seams. We can no longer contain in spreadsheets. And frankly, it's been a driver for Caseware Idea to sell a lot of product, because people can no longer fit things in spreadsheets, and they need proper tools to be able to perform the audit. Another big driver is really quality. People are getting frustrated with audits that don't go in the depth and aren't thorough enough. And auditors are actually getting sued and getting in trouble for audits that are done incompletely. So data analytics is a key way to counter that trend, is to be able to know whether something is correct or not by looking at all the transactions. Of course, efficiency, you want to see with automation that you can actually perform routine audits and run them in an automated fashion. So you don't have to spend a lot of human time looking at transactions and processes that are very, very well defined and very repeatable. Those can be automated easily, and I'll show you how you can do that. Effectiveness, of course, you're going to just be able to perform a better job and be able to look at things in a more wholesome way. And finally, compliance. Auditors are actually required to look at data. You know, you do realize there's standards like ISA 315 where we are actually required to look at systems and evaluate electronically the business we are looking at. It's no longer enough to take some samples and say, I had a conversation with the manager and everything is good. You're actually required to look at the data. So there are many drivers for data analytics. And I would say, with the right tools and techniques, internal audit is very well positioned to take advantage of this because the tools are out there and they're actually very powerful and pretty easy to use. So let's explore these tools in terms of each audit phase. So let's get started with the planning phase. We'll talk a bit about top-down and bottom-up approaches to how you can use tools. And the tools, just to be clear, they're not all, we do talk about data analytics, but there are other efficiency tools that will help the audit in general in terms of collaborating with clients, in gathering information, and having the customer answer some questionnaires beforehand so you can focus on certain areas. So it is really about automation as much as it is pure data analytics. So let's get started. All right, the planning phase. We all know the planning phase is critical to achieving a more effective and efficient audit function. If you don't know where you're going, you will never get there in the way you ought to. And if you look at in the audit universe as we have it today, we have a whole variety of assignments and auditable entities that we look at. And when you look at all the things that an organization has, we have no choice really but to divide and conquer this audit universe and break them and triage them into categories because there is too much to audit in any organization today. Most audit departments are not staffed to be able to audit absolutely everything every year. Some things are going to have to be spaced out, and there will have to be a multi-year audit plan. I know that may seem like an old-fashioned approach, but especially until you have your data analytics as a very well-oiled machine and fine-tuned operation, until that happens, you will never be able to do the entire scope of what an organization does in 1 year. So you will need to divide and conquer these things. So what are high risk? What are the regulatory items? Do you have personally identifiable information? Are there laws around this information that you could be fined if you don't achieve? Can data, because data can be cross-referenced. If you're looking at personal identifiable information, there are items that are automatically high risk. It could be very large amounts. It could be way beyond the materiality threshold. So you know the obvious ones that are high risk. You will look at the medium risk ones, are what I call perennials. Those are the ones that you have to do every year, but they are not necessarily large dollar amount necessarily. And when I was in audit, because I was in audit for about 12 years in many different organizations, government, utilities, banking, insurance. But P card, the purchasing card, always ended up on the audit plan, no matter what we did. And the reason why they did that isn't because the P card expense was that high. It's because it was a barometer for ethics. They would actually look at what's going on in the organization. Are people approving just anything? What kinds of things are people putting on cards, and are they taking personal items and making the company pay for it? What is the climate and the culture for how management authorizes and spends money? And though the results of those audits will help tell you what kind of culture you have and whether you can really rely on the internal controls you have. So these audits performed every year. So we'll talk a bit about how we can deal with these types of views. And the other ones, You know, if it's lower risk than that, they end up getting postponed, canceled outright. You really have to deal with them another day. So if you look at the planning phase, you really have to perform it from two perspectives, because one perspective is really not enough. And we'll talk about top-down versus bottom-up. The top-down review is where you're using your enterprise risk assessment to help drive out what you think are the largest and most riskiest items, according to what you saw earlier. So you're going to have your stakeholders are going to play a big role in that. And we'll get into the detail of each of these in a second. Bottom-up review is really talking about looking at the results from previous audits. You'll look at annual surveys. You'll look at risk events that happened. You will perform a risk assessment of all your transactions. And this is saying, based from the bottom of the organization, based on the actual data and the events that happened, what can we say about the function? Because we may think that we're well controlled, but when you look at the facts and the data, you may not be. So you really need both. You know, one thing that is very clear that we found is that organizations who are doing this well tend to have an intelligent, online, integrated and collaborative platform to help make this planning exercise easier. Rather than just saying, let's send each other a bunch of emails, they tend to have this sort of information in a platform where they have an audit universe created, where they can generate an audit universe. They can set what the risk levels are, and they can produce an audit plan rather than a separate spreadsheet, a separate place, and another separate place, and you have to duplicate data in every single one. They tend to do better and tend to be a smoother exercise with an integrated online platform. So what we're going to do is we're going to show the first video here that shows about what such a platform could look like. So I'm going to just do, I'm going to share the audio. So just give me 1 second here. I'm going to show this video. All right. So that gives you a very sort of super quick visual of what such an audit platform could look like. The way that you can have the stakeholders in the system, you have the auditable entities in the system. When you propose an audit, you can build a Gantt chart out, you can assign people, you can move the individual projects around if things happen and change in the list. It just becomes a much more streamlined way to manage your audits. So now let's look at another possibility or another way that you can use the other approach, the bottom-up review. So in other words, we're going to start from, and this is looking at the transaction risk assessment. So we're going to say, based on what's happened, dump the GL, let's see what transactions happened, let's define what we consider high risk, medium, low risk. Let's let the transactions tell the story. What are we actually seeing in the system? And that will help us figure out whether this function needs to be audited now, or maybe something that can be put on hold. So I'm going to switch over to one more video. Just give me 1 second here. There we go. All right. So that gives you a sense for, let me see if I can enlarge this for a second here. Give me a second here. I just want to present here again. There we go. All right. So that gives you a sense for the planning, and you can see with those, what you saw was an audit app called Exceptional Exceptions. And it's really an audit in a box, in the sense that you go through the entire process from mapping the data from whatever the source system is that you've been working on, and any system works. Doesn't matter if it comes out of Oracle or if it comes, if they're smaller accounting packages, really you can map that data to any system you want, feeds it into the machine, and you subject it to your risk rules. In other words, what's important to me, and you can set those little sliders to figure out, what's important to me. You can set thresholds that are relevant for you as an organization. So it's not, even though the test, it's a set series of tests, you can customize them, you can tweak them, and there's no programming or anything. You can just basically set your thresholds according to what you as an organization can handle, put it through the machine, and you can get a sense for what are my high-risk transactions, how many are there, what does it look like, and that is a very effective way to help do your risk assessment. So let's talk about the execution phase. So what kinds of things can we do while we're running the audit? So now we have a good sense for the risk, top down, bottom up. We kind of know, what we think is happening and what's actually happening. How do we make the execution run smoother? So things you should really consider, there are interactive audit programs and smart surveys. Is a technology where you're really engaging the client more in what you're doing. Of course, there are some data analytical techniques, and there's some advanced techniques, which we're going to show. So we're going to show some tools, what I call audit power tools, and see how they work. All right. So when you're executing the audit, you have many streams of communication going on. You're talking to different clients, different stakeholders, different managers, and each one has a piece of the puzzle. So what you can do is, typically when you ask questions of a client, you can't take up all the time you want. The client has to do their work, but you do want to condense your questions into some sort of survey. So traditionally, you might create a spreadsheet, email it to them, and try to find out answers. But spreadsheets are not a very effective way to answer questions, because let's say there are 10 questions. Maybe some of the questions aren't relevant if you've answered no to the previous question, but the customer has to sit and read through pages and pages of questions, which may or may not be relevant. So the problem is, it's just not a very effective way of doing it. And also, if the customer has answers to maybe 6 out of 7 questions, they may not send it back to you until they get the last question answered. Whereas when you use interactive surveys, it's a much more efficient way to get the client's answers. And I'm going to show these smart surveys, how they work, and it's very powerful and really, really efficient. And then we're going to show you audit power tools, which can help deal with data that is not a very good format that you have to transform and clean, and how you can gain really valuable insight and automate your steps very quickly with a couple of clicks. Again, audit power tools can really save your life here. And then we're going to talk a bit about advanced data analytics. So we're going to talk about using AI in auditing and how you can use machine learning and natural language processing to help get deeper and get better, higher quality audits. And of course, audit apps, we'll talk a bit of those as well. So let me get in here. So we're going to show you this whole Streamlined Communication, this platform, an intelligent audit platform where we have smart surveys. So we could send a survey to a client that will automatically filter out if you're answered no to this question, it skips to the next question. All that stuff is done to be efficient on the client's time. And it helps fill in your audit program automatically. When they answer certain questions, it checks them off in your audit program, and you no longer have to do those things. So I'll show you how that looks. It is very quick, but just so you get a sense for what's going on. So I'm going to do the whole sharing. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to share the sound. All right, I recognize that's very quick. But just to reiterate what happened, basically what happened is you could see that you could pick a calendar date and to say, please answer by the following date. You can pick stakeholders in the calendar, just choose their name. It was, I think, Humana Resorski was a fake client that we put in. And then you can put in a little email blurb to say, hi, how are you doing? Please send me these questions, answer these questions for me. And then you saw that there were some sections they can even put data in. So let's say the client has transactions. You could ask the client to say, please submit your GL dump for the month of whatever, and they can just drag and drop the file in and hit go, and you now have access to the data. So you can use it for many different things. All right, so now let's talk a bit about audit power tools. Now, they are very useful, and they are really the only option you have when you're dealing with a large amount of data, because there's just no human way to look at all this data manually. So I'm going to show the audit power tools and the common problems that they solve. For instance, you've got data, the client gives it to you in a PDF format. You know, what do you do? This is the only transactions you have. They're photographed PDFs. How do I bring them in? How do I analyze the data? Well, if you have the right power tools, that's actually not a big deal. Again, they protect your source data. They keep audit trails. They flow chart your actions automatically for documentation purposes. Again, you're performing a lot of really powerful standard audit functionality in just a couple of clicks. If you want to do an intelligence sample, if you want to do benefit analysis, a couple of clicks, and you have a visual representation of all your outliers. Again, you can use visualizations, look at trends, patterns, and outliers. You can do it once, and then if you want to automate it every month, it's a couple of clicks, and now you have an automation created. Very powerful stuff. And again, we're going to show you also how machine learning can be used, more advanced data analytics, but you can use machine learning and AI to find outliers. There's an example of HR. And I have a natural language processing example that can look at written language. And I've heard examples where auditors have to read maybe 100 reports and they have very little time to do it. You can actually use natural language processing to grind through all this text and find passages and subjects that are interesting to you, and they can actually look at things like, what's the sentiment of this? In other words, you know, how positive are we on this particular recommendation or this particular report, or how negative are we about it? So it's just a way that you can use this advanced technology to hone in on areas of interest. And of course, word clouds, we know how those work. So I'm going to show you the next video that shows all this. So give me 1 second.
we're going to have this tool run a text analysis app. We're going to select a report for the tool to read and parse and process the natural language. There are various file types it can take. We're going to open up the Pulse report from the IAA from 2020. It reads the report and outputs a bunch of data sets as well as visualizations, including a word cloud. Not surprisingly, audit is the most frequently occurring word in this report, followed by risk, and then plan. And here we see the inner workings of natural language processing, how it breaks down the text into a lemma, which is the root of the word that identifies the part of speech and whether it's a stop word. Here we see all the sentences that the tool has identified, along with a sentiment score based on the words in that sentence. The negative scored sentence here is about cities being vulnerable to ransomware attacks. The positive scored sentence is about public sector leading the way in gender diversity. So that makes a lot of sense based on the positive and negative sentiments associated with their scores. And here we can see the sentiment illustrated in a bar chart with the same two high scoring and low scoring sentences showing up on the bar chart accordingly. We just saw the positive sentence, and if we display the records for the negative scored bar, we see the same sentence again about the ransomware attacks. So that's the sentiment analysis bar chart. In the third database here, we see a word frequency bar graph, which is also associated with this data where if you click on the number of occurrences, for example, the word finding, you can see all of the sentences in which the word finding occurs along with their score.
All right, then. Yeah, you can see basically these tools are very powerful, right? You're able to take data that is not in a great shape, transform it, bring it into the system. You're able to take data that you didn't think you could use at all, PDFs. And in fact, we even have the ability to take scanned PDFs on a photocopier and basically still make sense of them from a data analytics perspective. So you have the opportunity to go through written reports. If they have, let's say, contracts or other types of reports that are inputs to your audit review, you can actually put them through the machine and see what you get. You can do keyword searches, you can identify data, even in reports that are not meant to be analyzed as data analytics. So they're very, very powerful techniques. You saw machine learning via AI, that simple HR example. Machine learning can find all kinds of things and things that you would not normally run into. Especially the larger the data gets, the more useful these techniques become. And of course, you saw all the classic data analytics, things are looking for gaps and so forth. It's just very, very useful. And you also saw how you can automate the test. You can basically execute all your tests when you like it, and then you can click history and say, I want to save this. I want to run it every month. You can schedule it, and you're off to the races. So, something that really will transform your execution phase. Now let's look at reporting. So reporting, we're dealing with really report generation. If you have integrated audit management solution, you're going to be able to generate your reports, pull your issues together, and your findings and your action plans all together automatically, and have that flow into a database, an issue tracking database. And of course, if you're using an audit app, like you saw exceptional exceptions, it actually has a module which will auto-generate the reporting. It'll pull audit objectives and the records and the exceptions that it found and commentary all together in one report for you. So I'm going to show you those two approaches for how you can improve reporting. And again, yes, it is just a way to get there faster. We can generate risk-based project findings. We could send findings and draft reports to client, track changes, accept edits. And just as I mentioned, audit apps can auto-generate a data-driven audit reporting. And what you really want to do is you want to, because I know report writing, when I was in audit, report writing is one of those areas that you can blow and waste a lot of time and wordsmith. So having a succinct, very clear, short report format is critical to getting that efficiency in reporting. So here are two approaches for doing that. And yes, I do have another video, because videos just show it in action rather than me talking about it. So I'm going to show you this one more thing. I think that's the last one.
Creating a finding is as easy as clicking a flag for findings and a button for a new finding, which generates a template that you can fill out, which automatically has a working paper reference based on where you created the finding, a risk rating, which you can select from, and a bunch of text sections to fill out. Once you've saved it, it then appears in a drop-down on the task where you created the finding, and then you can view it, edit it, and add management response and action plans once they've been provided. Then all of that information feeds a draft report. The draft report is based on you selecting the sections you want to include in the report based on how you communicate to your stakeholders, and you can include an overall opinion rating as well as all of the detailed findings, an appendix, and a distribution list. You then download the report and it'll automatically be created in Word with all of the selections that you just made. But now they're all pre-populated with data and information from elsewhere in the working paper file, including all of the detailed findings and action plans and their ratings. And then at the end, you can add an appendix section for any supplemental information, as well as a distribution list based on the client contact.
All right. Okay, so we've now been through the three phases of audit. We've looked at how the planning phase, how we can use data analytics in the planning phase, execution, and reporting phase. So tips on how you can get started with data analytics. You really need to integrate your audit process, your life cycle. You really need to start getting everything on the same platform so that when you make a change, that flows through to everyone else rather than there's 10 different spreadsheets that are all disconnected and you have to all update. Try to make every audit a data-driven audit. And I know that can be difficult, but I think you need to look at audit as a reason to try to, you need to be able to substantiate whatever you say. Even if you have an audit that doesn't look like it's very data-oriented, try to find evidence of how that data can be used. So you should be able to, I kind of call it a data analytics muscle. So what you're really doing is you're trying to give that muscle some exercise by always getting used to asking for the data, checking out the data, bringing it into your tool, trying to see if it's in the right format, trying to connect it to other data sources that are part of the flow, and just get used to that. Because I know people who are not doing a lot of data analytics in the beginning, it's a little tough, right? You got potentially more work. You've got to ask people for data. But what happens is when you start exercising this data analytics muscle, you end up getting more used to pre-planning. You start asking for things sooner. You start asking the right questions so that when you actually receive the data and you're going through it, you actually have a good idea of what's there, and you actually make more progress. So try to exercise your data analytics muscle. Visualize your data to look for trends, outliers, relationships. It can be very useful. You saw that with Benford's Law as an example, where a task shows you these are suspicious transactions, take a look at those. Tools like IDEA have one-click visualization. It's a start. It gets you going. You start to look at the data. You can create any kind of charting you want. You could summarize your data and then say, I wonder what that looks like, and chart it. There's many, many ways to do it. And even with things like Power BI, IDEA 11 comes with the ODBC driver that lets you use Power BI. Power BI just points to the IDEA project, and you choose, and each IDEA database becomes a table, and you can just visualize what you saw in that exceptions app. You do require to download Power BI client, which is free. You just download it, and you can use that with IDEA. So you've seen how that works. Again, use automation where manual work is an obstacle. If you're finding that you're doing the same P-card audit or the same tax audit every single time, we have many clients who actually, remember we saw that in one of the videos where you can click history and you can save the script and you can just run it and you can schedule it. People do that. You know, they install this and then they automate tests that are the same basically every month. And if they see a lot of transactions or things change, they may get more involved and say, okay, we need to perform a more thorough audit because this trend is going the wrong way. So it's just a way to help use automation more effectively. Use audit apps where the process is well defined. You saw that the very last video where you produce audit transactions and then produce a report. Those audit apps, if you have, and we have clients who are performing certain tax audits, and they have literally saved, you know, what used to take a full month for people can be done in a couple of days, right? So it's quite dramatic what you can do with audit apps. And augment these apps with statistical models and machine learning. If you're finding that you want to be able to just get another look at what you're doing, try running things like outliers. Get some machine learning, just see what it finds. It'll find things you don't expect, including what you saw, that transaction in the video. That was something that we had not seen until we started to use machine learning. And finally, start evolving to more continuous monitoring, as I talked about. If you see something and it looks more normal, try just to automate it, just put it on the schedule, run it every month, and look for the trends. And that way you can get out of some of those perennial audits that you're always doing and push them into the automation stack and then focus on new areas that you're not looking at. And with that, that's the end of my regular presentation. And I think it's probably time for some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Thank you very much for this presentation. I think we have a house full today, and let me tell everyone, because they already received about Jeffery Sorensen in their emails before they logged on to our presentation today. But I think Jeff made it sound so simple today, you know, though it's a hell of a lot of work, you know, planning, execution, reporting. It's not easy. We all know that as internal auditors, but he made it so simple in 40-45 minutes, you know, sounded very simple, very easy, but the spotlight should be on the last slide which he presented, the second last slide before thank you. That is how you get started with your analytics on data-driven audit. So that's the spotlight. We are, of course, going to put this presentation on YouTube. Let's quickly go through the questions. I think I'll take the Jairam. I'll take the questions which are here, please. And then you can. I think there is a question. We are a decentralized organization with different ERP systems at our divisions. Can we still use this tool? Can we still use IDEA? Jeff.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And now we do have, there is something called Smart Exporter, which is designed specifically for SAP. But if you use any other ERP, IDEA, as you saw in that Audit Power Tools video, we can connect to any kind of data you can think of, whether it's an ODBC database, whether there's text files, Excel, like really whatever you can think of. It could be PDF reports that come out of systems. It doesn't matter if it's mainframe or what the platform is. We can read pretty much anything. I have not seen a data type that we couldn't work with. And IDEA also has Python built in. So if there's something that IDEA doesn't do out of the box, Python can be made to run and look at absolutely everything. So yeah, it's a rich platform and we should be fine.
Okay, and I'm going to club two more questions together. There's a question on which version of IDEA can directly link to Power BI. And there's another question on, is the exceptional exceptions app generally available? So,
Right.
Jeff?
Sure, of course. Yes, Idea 11, if you want to be using Power BI, the ODBC driver comes included. You can talk to Sama Audit and they can show you how that works. But basically, yes, you can use Power BI with that ODBC driver, or you could use Tableau. You could use anything that requires ODBC data that can connect to Idea. So absolutely, you can do that with Idea 11. Talk to Sama; they'll get you set up. Exceptional exceptions app, and again, if you with Passport for those when you have Idea 11, there's a whole section on how to download these apps, and that's exceptional exceptions is in there. There's also something called utilities, which is really powerful. Which is also you can find in the exact same place. So there's a very rich library of add-ons and apps and scripts that are all part of being in the Idea 11 customer. Being part of that framework, you get access to a huge library of functionality.
There's a question on, is report preparation part of Idea?
Report preparation, you saw those exceptional exceptions. So with an audit app, there is the report preparation comes along with it. It has the ability to format the data into a report. But like reports, you can always export data out for any kind of report purposes that you need. So for instance, if you're exporting a chart, you can easily export that chart out and paste it into whatever format you want. So people use Idea data all the time in reporting. So there's many rich ways, and there's also a report creation capability in Idea where you can put cover pages and you can create a report from your data. So there's a rich variety of ways to get reporting out of Idea.
Which audit tool was shown in the video?
Right. So there is the Audit Management tool. So there's Idea is going to start performing some demos and start to show. But if you followed Caseware for a while, we've been rich in audit management platforms. We were doing traditionally we're doing a lot with working papers for financial auditors, and of course for internal auditors. We have some tools that we're going to show you more demos of throughout this year. So what you've seen there are tools that are on the external audit financial side, we call Caseware Cloud, and they have solutions there that you've seen. But there's going to be a lot more coming. But if you want to see more of those tools, talk to Sama. We can definitely show you what that is. If that's something that is interest, we'll definitely help you.
Can we expect Idea to include median and mode in field statistics in near future?
Field statistics is very interesting because now that we've incorporated Python right into Idea, we now have the capability of, shall we say, any amount of math that you can think of from an Idea perspective. So we created an app called Pandas Profiling. And it is, the people call it exploratory data analysis. So it's an app, I really should have shown you the app in this video. But yeah, it's an app where you open a database and you click a button and you have a choice between very advanced statistics or just more basic statistics. And then it creates charts and it will include mode, median, it does correlation analysis. It's very detailed and it's visual. And it creates little collapsible sections that you can open, and you can include that in your audit. So yes, we do have that capability now. It's not in the field statistics in Idea, but it's a button you can push, and you can get very rich output.
Thank you. There have been number of questions on will we share the slides and whether we'll share the content. So I just wanted to clarify to everyone that since this will be a weekly analytics Wednesday, we are not going to send across any emails to individual participants or registrations, register people who register. But what we'll be doing is we are going to beam. We have captured this on YouTube. So you can all access the YouTube Sama channel to have a look there. You can also access it on the website of Sama Audit. So you can go through as many times as you like. So it will be freely available in a public domain, unless the speaker prohibits us from putting it in public domain in future. But I think Jeff's presentation will be available for all of you in public domain on the YouTube channel. Now, what is the maximum limit of data that IDEA can handle? There's one question on that.
Right. So it is basically 2 to the power of 32, I think. So it's over 2 billion rows for a single IDEA database. So that's what it is right now. But honestly, I have never seen, and I've performed. The beauty of IDEA is that you can have enormous data, and like for scrolling around and looking at the data, it's good at buffering the data, so it doesn't have to load all of it at once. But I've had 250 million records, and you can scroll around, look at the data, and it's quite usable. So over 2 billion records for a single database. It's actually a lot more than you think. But yeah, that's the limit now.
Good. Another question is, from example, how effective is Smart Survey in audit presently?
Right. I mean, we have an entire if you're an accountant in Canada, the Caseware Cloud platform is a leading platform where accountants can set up manage the whole practice, and that's how they get their data today. They simply set up questionnaires that meet their audit objectives, and clients are engaged in this workflow where they provide the data, they answer questions about their business, and whatever they answer in the survey checks off that box in the audit program, because the survey is linked directly to the audit program on the back end, and there's intelligence in the survey. So that's been used today all over the world. If you want to see more examples of that, you can definitely talk to Sama Audit, and we can arrange something. But yeah, no, that's been a huge success. And we have partners all over the world who build solutions on that platform, where they're creating their own surveys and that are custom to them. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sure. There's a question: does the IDEA software need to have direct access to the database to extract or access the data? Would the client's IT department generally object to this requirement if you are a third-party firm providing internal audit services?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I mean, third-party arrangements can be really an audit should always be before the company engages in third-party arrangements. Access to data should be something that is paramount. I mean, it should be very clear in the contract that the client has access to the data. Self-serve would be the best option, but there's nothing held back, that the client would be able to, at their own whim, pull out data. I do recognize that sometimes those agreements are not written that way, and audit somehow has to wait in line and has to follow a process to get the data. But the way IDEA accesses database data is you need a connection at the time when we say extract the data, you're extracting a copy of the data, right? And then IDEA writes a local database with that data. And then you can turn off the connection, and IDEA doesn't need to have a constant connection into the database. It can do a one-time connection and then turn off. So that way it's better for the IT administrators, because they don't have this constant pull on their transaction data. So that tends to be what people use. Is they have regular pulls, however often that's required, or they'll have some sort of a not the main transaction database, but they might have a management reporting layer and go after that, because the clients don't mind more hits on that, whereas maybe the transaction database maybe doesn't have the capacity to have constant pulls from IDEA. So you're going to have to negotiate a bit that with your clients, but you have to look at the data, and if you can deal with transactions that are a day old and take it from a management reporting layer, you're probably better off doing that, because you could do it more often and no one cares. If you must have it straight from the transaction database, you can run into the case where the IT managers in your company are getting upset because they think IDEA is interrupting their servers too much. So it's going to be a negotiation you're going to have to make in your company.
I just can add to that, Jeff, that with the present pandemic, what we find generally when we speak to all the professionals in the country, in India specifically, most of the outsourced firms are getting access to the client data, whether it is SAP or any other ERP or accounting software, because that's part of the way you carry out audit today. So you will have access to the client data, except in cases where there are specific, security non-disclosure agreements and security concerns when you are dealing with banks or financial institutions or insurance companies. Other than that, usually data is generally available to the internal audit firms who carry out audit. That's the norm. But there's a question on that by Shobit. When we try to pull data from the client system, they generally ask for the security assessment report. How do we resolve such issues?
Right. So, I mean, maybe that's a question for you, Deepji, as far as in India and the experience you've had in India is, doesn't that tend to be more of an upfront agreement?
Yes.
And, okay. So, yeah, maybe talk a bit about what you've seen in India, how that works.
I think whenever you're signing up with a client, it is implicit that you will require to have data available from their, because normally everybody would be carrying out data-driven audit. Today, you cannot carry out audit without accessing client data. So, it is upfront that you already deal with the client and say that we require access to data. Our teams would require access to data. So they would create a special login account and you will get the data. But some financial institutions, as I said earlier, or some institutions may say that you need to sign a non-disclosure agreement, but they'll still share data with you. So, or some other organizations may say that, for example, banks may say that you'll have to use our laptops. We'll provide you the hardware and the software from where you can access the data. So that's their security protocol and we'll follow that. So in that case, we may ask them to install the software on their PCs, and then we carry out audit, because ultimately you need to use audit tools to perform the audits.
Yes. Yeah, I find remote desktop and that kind of technology is very useful. Right. And I find that many organizations, I've worked for several banks and insurance companies, and they were big on that. They were big on, your VPN or you remote into an area and nothing leaves that area. You can't copy data out. You're in that area, you do your work and you log off and the data never leaves the safe room. Right. And that can work very well. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. And I have seen that as well, where they install idea on-prem and you run the data there and you just walk away. You can uninstall it and you don't take it with you. So there are creative ways to deal with it. And especially now in the world we live in, customers have to deal with it. I mean, that's why I said in the beginning of the presentation, if internal audit uses good tools and is willing to be flexible, we can come out just fine. And internal audit can thrive and help our companies. That's what we should be doing.
I think what Shobit says is, yes, in statutory audit, the client, we will get our data on a laptop and we can pull the data in Excel and then use IDEA, but cannot pull directly from IDEA. So, that's a client restriction, specific client restriction. So I think you directly negotiate with the client and do the best you can. So because in internal auditor, whether in-house or outsourced, is an element of, managerial element of the organization. So how each organization deals with the internal auditor also depends on how an internal auditor can negotiate their role with the organization per se, and also the security protocols which the organization has set up for dealing with partners.
Right. In fact, I want to mention one more thing. You do realize the chief auditor, if they do not get access to the data and do not perform the job they're supposed to, they are allowed to go to the board and ask for this information. If the board withholds that, ultimately the chief auditor will be held accountable, right? The chief auditor has to bring this to their attention and they are ultimately going to be blamed. But the chief auditor either has to get this access or should probably quit, right? To say, you're making it impossible for me to perform my job, right? Something has to happen. And ultimately, audit has no choice. This has to happen. And the client is going to, if they withhold services, then internal audit cannot function. Then there's a board problem, right? It's absolutely required. I talked a bit about compliance earlier, and there are some hard rules here. ultimately it must happen, or you're not letting audit do what they're supposed to do. It's impossible for them to do the job without it.
Absolutely. And I think, Jairam, do we have any more questions, or should we?
No questions on YouTube and no questions
Okay.
on
So I think.
Zoom too.
Okay, great. So Jeff, I think I want to thank you and all the participants once again, and watch out for the second session, second episode next week on a global idea analytics from India, transformation of internal audit. And we have Mr. Mukundan KV from All Cargo Global Logistics, who's the Chief Audit Executive and Assurance Risk Officer for the All Cargo Global Logistics Company, who will be with us next week from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. So email will go out to all of you, and maybe you can register for that event also. So thank you very much, Jeff, once again for the wonderful presentation.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.